Good evening, everyone. And I have to say, I never get tired of that music. One day I might go live just to hear that music over and over again. Of course, that would annoy everybody that's listening, so I won't do that. But anyway, we are here today with award winning author V.S. Holmes, and welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Ah, pleasure. And if I can, let's talk a little bit. You have two series out that has four books each. Can you tell us a little bit about each series?
Sure. So my first series was Second World Fantasy, and that's the Blood of Titan series, and it focuses more on political fantasy as opposed to action or like lit RPG, and it follows the three mostly human main characters who are caught in the crossfire of a war between the gods and the more titanic creatures that created them, and that was my first baby, my first series, and I may revisit it at some point in the future. But for the most part, it's wrapped up for now. And then I also have a science fiction series, which is a lot more fast-paced, action-packed, and that's the Star's Edge Nel Bently series. And it has four books, will be six eventually, and that follows foul-tempered and foul-mouthed Dr. Nell Bentley, and she is an archaeologist who discovers that her pristine site is actually the center of an intergalactic feud. And so she is thrown into this high-tech, higher-stakes world, and not really a fan, definitely a skeptic, but that girl on the other side of things sure is cute. So she's going to go as far as it takes her, even if that is space.
Oh, sweet. And so you have two more books coming to that one. Are you going to add any more or start a new series for the fantasy?
I definitely think I have several stories planned within the Star's Edge sci-fi series. Probably not with those exact characters. I have a few side characters that I just can't get out of my head. So I think I'd like to explore some of their tales, and then also a few aspects of the world that I haven't really gotten a chance to delve into in the main series. But yeah, definitely not full canon yet. So.
Oh, I understand that because there's some side characters that you really do want to know more about.
Yeah.
Even as a reader, it's like, oh, what about this character? I want to know about this character.
Sometimes they get to be your favorite ones. I mean, you're not supposed to pick favorite characters, right? It's like picking a favorite kid. But I think we all secretly do it. And there's definitely a few that I can't get out of my head.
So what was your biggest inspiration for each of these series?
Sure. So with my fantasy series, I grew up reading a lot of sci-fi fantasy, and I didn't always see some of the more quiet stories and some of the stories that focused on more of the psychological impacts of the big titanic magic and war and things like that, or fantasy that focused on characters who were like me, and that's something that I wanted to explore more, and also get into some of the weirder aspects of faith and deities, and the downside of being a hero, and the downside of meeting your heroes, and finding out that maybe they're not so heroic, maybe not the best people. So that was definitely my inspiration there. And then with Nell, it actually started out as kind of a palate cleanser. I was halfway through my Blood of Titan series, and I was kind of in a rut, and I wanted to try something new and flex my creative muscles a bit. So I'm like, oh, I'll just write this short little novella. It'll be a one-off. It's not going to be a series or anything. It'll just be like this fun thing I do on the side. And six books later, I've learned never to say it's just a standalone. And so that's how it sort of started. But the inspiration for the story itself was my own work as an archaeologist, and some of the wild people we meet, and some of the deeper themes too that we often come up against. Where we come from, where we're going, and how different cultures can intersect in ways that aren't always violent, or that are more collaborative. So
that's You got me intrigued now with the archaeology part.
Now you know
Like,
why I work outside.
yeah, now we know why you work outside. Now it's like, okay, now I have a whole new set of questions, but that's not really for this one.
Surprise.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, where can people find these books online? Are they going to be on Amazon, Barnes and Noble?
So
Is
if you're an ebook person, they
Mhm.
are all on Kindle, Kindle Unlimited. And if you're more of a paperback person, you can order them at your local bookstore. You can order them through Amazon, and pretty much any bookstore will carry them because they're available through Ingram. You can also get a signed copy on my website if you want.
That's what I was going to ask. What is your website, if I can ask?
vsholmes.com. Holmes as in
VS Home.
Sherlock.
Hey, if you find any Holmes material, send it our way.
It's an easy name. It's an easy name because it's at least people know how to spell it. So
That is definitely up on our page, and I'll add that to the Facebook a little bit later.
Mhm.
So, tell us a little bit more about these books, if you can. I mean, you won an award. What was it? Did you submit into the award? Did they say, "Hey, we really want to give you an award"?
So I submitted my first book in the fantasy series Smoke and Rain to the new Apple Literary Award several years ago, and I almost forgot that I had submitted it. It was like, oh well, I'll just see. It'll be interesting. Worst case scenario, they say no, right? And I had pretty much forgotten that I had submitted. And then I saw that the deadline for when they were going to announce it passed. I'm like, oh, I haven't heard anything. It's fine, no big deal. And 3 days later, I get an email saying, well, it was such a tight race that we had to delay announcing it for a few days, but that I won their Excellence in Independent Publishing Award for fantasy. And I was so excited, I ran across the driveway. I was living in my parents' garage at the time. I ran across the driveway at like 11 o'clock at night. I'm like, Mom, you're actually going to be proud of me. Like, I've finally done something. Um, she's an editor and like a very literary person, but not with genre fiction. She reads like,
Mhm.
historic fiction, narrative nonfiction, all of that kind of thing. So she's like, "Oh yeah, your little fantasy book, that's nice." So yeah, it was really amazing. And a couple years later, I got linked up with Mickey Mickelson with Creative Edge, and it just sort of took off from there. And it's won Literary Titan Gold as well, which is like it's so fun to have like your first book do these things because when you dare if you dare to go back and look at your old work, it can be a little horrifying sometimes. So it's quite nice to have that reception. So
Yeah, I do want to go back one of these days and reread my first book, but it's like I'm kind of
no,
scared to.
back
Kind of
out now.
scared to.
Yeah.
So, uh, what about conventions? I mean, we talked a little bit earlier before the show. Do you do conventions? Have you done conventions? Are you going to do conventions again?
I really enjoy conventions, and I've made so many like amazing contacts. Actually, the cover artist for my fantasy series, we just happened to be seated next to each other. I was there supporting a friend at the time, and watching the table for them, and yeah, it's always been just so wonderful. I'm usually in Artist Alley being an author, and I just I love the vibe, and I love being able to go there and like everyone's weird, so you're not weird. Because usually I'm like the weird one, and going there is just it's like coming home most of the time. I've mostly gone to some of the smaller conventions in New England where I'm based. Granite State Comic Con, I think, was actually my very first Comic Con, and Boston Con, and some of the larger ones as well. But I'd love to go to some of the more literary ones as well, because I mostly stick to the comic ones. But going to like just a book convention, I think would be really neat. And I did get to go to Sirens Con in 2019. which is a literary convention mostly focused on speculative fiction. And that, I mean, to talk about coming home, that was just an incredible experience. So.
It definitely sounds like it. So, okay, we definitely have the conventions covered. So, what would you say is your most questionable part of any of your books that come to your mind that you were like, I want this in there, but I don't want this in there?
That's a good question. Questionable. I have a lot of death, and not just like war has death, right? And that's no stranger to a lot of the sci-fi and fantasy crowd. But being an archaeologist and dealing with death and with bodies and the culture around that, I can get into a lot of the psychological parts of death, I think, sometimes in a way that I'm coming at it from a slightly different angle. And I think some people are a little surprised by that. They expect the explosions, they expect body parts flying everywhere, they expect those things. But the aftermath of those things, isn't always approached in an anthropological way. And so I think that might be one of the more questionable ones. Of course, there's being a queer person myself, there's a lot of gender stuff that goes on, and a lot of sexuality, but for me that's not questionable. That's just like, I'm writing what I know. But I'm sure for certain audiences that would be the case.
Well, you got me thinking here. It's like, have you ever thought about doing like a crime novel with that psychological aspect?
Actually, part of my sci-fi is solving. There is a killer sound signal that is headed towards Earth, and there is a lot of trying to solve that, and following the trail of increasingly mutilated bodies that is caused by that. So there's a little bit of forensic stuff going on in there.
Yeah. Just multi-genre in all one book. That's kind of, I mean, you really don't get that a lot, and it's exciting. I know I'd worked on a book that, well, it's still kind of in the works. That's actually a fantasy Western.
Oh, cool.
So
is that Weird West? Is that what that genre is called? Weird West or something?
I don't know what it would be called, in all honesty. But it has the fantasy aspect of different worlds, but it's still the Western. So
yeah,
it's the multi-genres in one series it's actually hard to do.
Yeah. Well, you have to pick which beats you want to hit, and which, if you want to try and fit them all in. I think sometimes it seems easy because it's like, oh, it's just the setting. Like, oh, fantasy and sci-fi is just the setting. It's like, well, there's a lot more to it than that.
Yeah, because you have to actually get with the characters and the settings, and then it's like you have to still deal with, like, if you're like a Western, you have to deal with that culture as well. Right. And then add the fantasy to it, and then like try to find out if there's a way to mix it. That's where it really gets hard.
Yeah.
So,
well, there's clearly an audience for it. So
yes, I compliment you. Like I said, definitely. So, I don't think you're going to be having anything coming up soon for conventions. Do you have any signings coming up that you know of?
I am in the I'm in the drafting trenches right now.
Oh.
The rewriting drafting trenches. But I do have a new project that I can't say like too much about. But because I have to wait for a launch at another convention that's happening in August. But I am writing for a gaming company currently, doing some world building and character development and things like that for a role-playing card game that is launching at Gen Con. So that's been really fun, and that's sort of been my focus, and part of why I'm still in the drafting trenches. but it's been really neat to do something like in someone else's world. Because I know my world like the back of my hand, but being able to be creative and make up things, but with other people's characters and other people's world building has been really fun and very different for me. So
Very nice. We just actually had a gaming company on a few months ago that we talked to that's in the process of trying to make a game.
nice.
Now I'm going to have to ask you after the show if it's the same company.
Yeah, I know. I'm curious. I know. I'm excited for when I'm allowed to gab about it. So
Definitely. But everyone, you can find VS Holmes at vsholmes.com, and you can order a book there. And I believe I heard her say that she would sign it and send it to you. So
I will. And actually, if you aren't sure if lesbian archaeologist in space or brooding psychological fantasy is your thing, you can download 2 short stories, one in each of my worlds, for free at my website. So you can dip your toes in the VS Holmes waters.
it's always good to get a fresh read too. So definitely check her out, everyone. And I don't even have my schedule in front of me, but I do know y'all will see me tomorrow night on the Con Hour with Anchor Con, which is in Clayton, New York. So
Awesome.
We will see y'all tomorrow at 6 p.m. Until then, everyone, adios.